Welcome to another episode of Private Market Insights. This is our conversation series where we discuss important topics related to the small business M&A industry. Please subscribe to our show through YouTube or anywhere where you get your podcasts. I am the co-founder and CEO of Private Market Labs, and we have been hard at work over the last couple of weeks to bring new data insights about the SMB space. So check out our first industry medians report on our website, www.privatemarketlabs.com. And stay tuned for a special data product designed for subscribers, which is coming out really soon. I've been really looking forward to this episode because our guest is the fantastic Karen Spencer, Managing Director of Fetch Strategies and a co-founder of Searchfunder. We are streaming live today. Karen is one of my dearest friends in the SMB space, and we're going to talk about one of her favorite topics, which is building community within our industry. Welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about this because I'm usually on the other end, and you ask such great questions, so I can't wait to hear what you have to ask.
Fantastic. Well, you've hit with some good ones too, and on the opposite side. So hopefully we'll make it worth your while. So you and I have chatted a number of times about the importance and value of building community as a searcher. It's sustaining, it keeps people going, it provides important advice. Go build community is something we hear all the time. So let's go one layer deeper than that. What should a searcher or operator be looking for out of their community in the SMB space?
I'd like to analogize this to the political realm, which I ran for office during the pandemic, which I would not recommend during the pandemic, but I do recommend running for office. And when I ran for office, I had my kitchen cabinet. That's a term that comes from Lyndon Johnson. I had then my project team, my super supporters, and my supporters. And I think that we can double click down on each of those if you want.
I
I
love the
think
Lyndon
that
Johnson reference. That's my alumni namesake, right? I'm the
ah,
LBJ school grad here in Austin. So there you go. Anyway,
oh,
keep going.
cool,
Sorry. Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I think about building community in those terms, and in a lot of times these days we've got a ton of conferences that are happening, meetups, which is absolutely wonderful, but at the same time, participating in communal activities is not necessarily building community. I always advise searchers to be strategic about it and to understand that it's a two-way street as well.
Fantastic. And so, like you mentioned conferences, but what are some of in addition to conferences, what are some of the main ways that searchers and operators have, found community in our space just historically?
Well, historically, like, if you look back in the early days of search, it was really professors, investors, and students going to places like Stanford and Harvard. When I first entered the search fund community, there was that fragmented real world space, but there was not a virtual space. Today, we have all of these conferences, it seems like a couple a month in the US, and you and I and a few other people have been road warriors over the last couple of years now, right? We've got that, we've got the meetups, we've got the WhatsApp group, and of course, Searchfunder, and that really helped to bring the community together in the virtual space. I remember a time when, like, the first, searchers from Austin were getting on the platform, right? And Houston, and you get somebody from Tallahassee or Atlanta or the folks in Australia. I remember those days, and now it's a global phenomenon.
Amazing. Yeah, it's certainly grown a lot even in the last couple of years just since I started engaging with the space. So I guess you talk a little bit about the shift from kind of the in-person space to the digital space. Like how like do you feel like it sounds like it's been sort of like a sea change in terms of the way people are finding their communities. What is sort of the evolution of the digital space? What has that sort of done to help searchers?
It it's So I speak in terms of having co-founded Searchfunder, right? And it's absolutely been a sea change for prospective searchers. When you, when I, and it's so hard to explain to people because I feel like it's like we're talking about the era of Fred Flintstone, right? Um, if you think about the fact that in the early days, a searcher would have to go to, let's say, a bank in Wichita that they had no relationship with and try to persuade that bank to give them a loan to buy a business in Wichita. And now we have things like search fund lending centers at all of the major banks. And that really came about because there was a core community that people can interface with. I hear from people all the time about how they were able to get a deal done or find an investor, find the right broker, find something through Searchfunder that helped propel them forward. And you can't do that without community.
Yeah. You've been a big advocate for increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the search community. What are some ways that existing structures fall short for diverse searchers? And, what are some notable efforts you've seen to improve this piece? Because I know we've seen, a number of improvements as well.
Yeah. And we definitely have. I think you have to start with the foundation that the first searchers were largely relatively advantaged, relatively young, and mostly male, and in the early days, tall men as well, I would say, um, as well. So when I look at those three pieces, right, relatively advantage, we there is a disparity when it comes to things like student loan debt, right? If you're coming out of college or grad school with no to low student debt, it's very different than high debt. In my own personal life, I graduated from law school with $70,000 in debt, which seemed, and that was the highest for anybody in my section out of law school. And when you're just out of school, everybody's broke, everybody feels broke, and I didn't notice any real differences. Like, oh yeah, somebody seemed to go on like fancier vacations or maybe went out to dinner a little bit more than I did, but I didn't notice anything. Well, fast forward, 5 or 6 years, they're buying houses, they're buying really nice cars, they're taking chances with entrepreneurship, and I'm like, "Well, why can't I do any of those things?" And it's because I had such crippling debt that basically my student loan debt was my first house. It was I still haven't had a really, really nice car, but I'll get there one day. I'm not a car person. But it took me a while to get into entrepreneurship because there were so many other things I had to do to have that foundation first.
Yeah, fantastic. And so in terms of like, I think, I've seen you've made some comments. I think I've seen them on LinkedIn perhaps where you've talked about, rising diversity at some of the conferences that we've been to. What do you think has helped break through, whether it's, on a like racial diversity, gender diversity, socioeconomic diversity, age diversity, what has sort of helped our cause from an SMB industry standpoint? What's kind of pushed that forward and helped broaden its appeal beyond just kind of like the Harvard MBA style searcher?
I My hypothesis is that it's the same thing that made search funds perform well in the first place, and that is the collegial environment that we have and that we enjoy and that we all want to protect and maintain as the ecosystem expands and grows. I, I I think that's a great foundation to start with. And then we have to, as you've just alluded to, look at how the structures that help those first searchers along can impede other searchers, right? If you look at women in the United States, and I'll just talk for the United States because I don't want to generalize to everywhere, but women in the United States still disproportionately bear the brunt of a lot of the making of a functioning household, whether that's budgeting, childcare, elder care. There's a whole list of things that they do that constitute emotional and mental labor, and that has a cost in not only to them, but in terms of their time and ability to do an activity like search. Not that it's impossible, we have some great women doing it, but we've got to understand that there might be, structures in place that might mean that women take a little longer to find a great deal, or might have to overcome, other people's biases as women as CEOs.
Yeah. I was talking to we talked to Whitney Shepherd here on the podcast a few months ago, and she shared, a lot of the a similar message in terms of, the collegial element sort of helping broaden the appeal of the search process. And you can really see it, in places like Searchfunder, through the programs that you're offering at Fetch, for example, just people really getting together to help each other. And one observation I heard, I'd be interested in your opinion on this. I heard this observation today, which is everyone's only really buying one deal at a time. You hear some stories of people buying, three, four deals in a couple of years. Sometimes those turn out well, sometimes they don't. But everyone's buying one deal. There are hundreds of thousands of deals out there. It's a situation where you're looking for the best deal for you, and that creates an environment that makes it easy to help each other. I might be looking for a manufacturing company. You might be looking for a healthcare related company. We're able to collaborate and help each other out, share deal flow, et cetera. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to be competing for the same business.
I I'm gonna challenge that just a little bit because we are starting to see multiple searchers on the same deal in the United
Mm,
States.
yeah.
Outside of the United States, I think that that is still true, but I think that the difference in the US between, say, searchers and private equity is what we talked about a little bit earlier, which is the building of a relationship. A searcher is not going to win the business because they've got the highest amount of money at their disposal. They're going to win uh, that deal because they've got a great plan and a great ability to build a relationship with the seller's broker, and the employees going forward.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. So and we've heard AJ Wasserstein talk about this a little bit, right? What do you think? What do we do to preserve this great culture then? Obviously, if it's getting a little more competitive, to your observation, right? What sort of helps preserve that?
This is such a wonderful question, and I've thought a lot about it, and I had to go back kind of in looking back at my career, the places that had solid culture, and I would say that the cultures that really held together were the ones that did not condone a behavior that was against the culture. Like,
Mm,
folks understood what the culture was about, and they did not condone the behavior, and the people who might have been perfectly good people, but who did not fit that culture, um, understood that and kind of moved on. I don't know if that's going to happen with the search fund space, but certainly if we see behavior that we don't condone, we should say, no, this is not what we do. And I do see that at Search Funder, right? If somebody comes on and they seem to be self-serving and just out for themselves, they quickly get reported. And people don't wanna deal with them, so I we do see that happening, we just have to make sure that we are, vigilant about it.
yeah. No, that makes sense. You've written recently about transactional versus relational styles of community building. Can you touch a little bit on the differences between those two things and how people can use this concept as a framework for their own networking?
Yeah, oh, certainly. So when I talk about transactional in the context of the American business culture, what I'm meaning is that it is a relationship that is based on whatever that alignment is at that particular moment. It tends to be an American business culture that relationships are built around a task or an objective, that your status within the organization tends to align with your resources, so whatever budget, monetary aspects that you might have, and even personnel go along with it. The relational side is that many communities, and I'm going to talk about the African American community, uh, value the relationship. So I may, do something for somebody else because I trust them, not because of their title. I might be hesitant to vouch for somebody because I'm like, I don't know that person, right? Or I might be happy, like, I know this person, I think they're loyal, they're trustworthy, I think they'll be a great fit for what you need done. So that's transactional versus relational. So if you're coming from a culture that is more relational, the American business culture can seem kind of strange to you because you'll be like, wait a minute, they just fired that person like 3 months ago and now they're back. Right? Or something like that'll happen. You think, how to like if I were firing somebody, I don't think they'd speak to me ever again, and
Right.
don't know if I'd want them to, right? And that's the relational piece. So when you're building relationships, because we're always talking about that in the search space, you have to understand what is the framework you're coming with. Like, are you a relational person? Are you a transactional person? And how does that apply, right? So if I tell somebody who's coming from a relational culture to build a relationship with a broker, I'm not meaning that you have to invite them to your kid's bat mitzvah, or that have to bake them a cake or anything like that. What I'm saying is you have to build enough credibility that that person, and trust that that person will send you the deals that might align with what you're looking to do, that you can get that particular deal done.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you hit on something really important at the end, which is this idea of like trust building in networking, right? And I think that it can be really challenging. Like I think for especially for people who aren't natural extroverts to come in and say like, "Hey, I'm going to come in and my goal is to build a relationship with you, but my context for you is within this professional setting." And so it's not so much like we're in a collaborative, like friendly environment, and therefore I'm going to build a friendly relationship. It's like we're in a professional environment, but that relationship in a networking capacity has to transcend that professional level to a slightly more like personal level while still staying sort of quasi professional. It's a very sort of nuanced skill set. And I found that I've met people who are really, really good at it. And I've met people who are really bad at it. And I guess, I mean, do you have any sort of words of wisdom for people who maybe that doesn't come naturally? As obviously, as an expert in this, like how do you sort of help people get past that initial fear?
Well, that is such a loaded question. I
I,
could take that in like
it's a
3
very broad
different ways.
question too. I try not to ask questions that long. I do it
Right.
every episode. I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's okay, let me see if I could distill a couple of pieces down, right? The first is the professional versus the personal, right?
Yes.
You definitely wanna have friendly and cordial relationships. I heard stories early on in this space where somebody, they've always had friends at school, friends at their workplace. Now they're the boss at a company, and they quickly realize, oh, yeah, I can't be hanging out at 11 o'clock at the bar with my employees, right? It's very, very different. So you always have to be mindful of the professional capacity, but you definitely want it to be personal and cordial. The thing that sort of had my mind spinning for a second there, a lot of what you're talking about is something that Professor Rachel Moore Bast talked about at the MIT conference,
Mm.
which is referent or relational power. Now, we use the term relational a little bit differently, and I'm very excited to start really exploring her work. But you do need to have that trust building to build influence, which then translates into power, the power to get something done. A lot of times people think of power as the ability to dominate, and I think she's using it and I'm using it in the capacity of getting something done, getting something achieved, and that just comes from, being able to be trustworthy, somebody that somebody, wants to emulate, somebody that somebody wants to be loyal to.
Yeah. That's a fantastic answer to a really poorly worded question. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Let's change gears just slightly because I
Okay.
think if I go down more permutations of this, I'm gonna lose the whole audience and I don't want to do that. So um you mentioned to me on a prior call that there's a large cohort of, you called them lapsed MBA searchers. So basically people who are entering this market who have this MBA, who are coming from that background, but maybe are not coming directly from their MBA. They've been in the workforce for a little while, and they still have to therefore build community. They're not coming in with this built-in business school community, even though they have that skill set. So, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing from that particular group of searchers, particularly as they engage with you at Fetch, for example?
I for me, this is the really exciting group of people, right? They've done the choice many times to be a W-2 employee in the U.S., and now they are ready to be their own boss. They've managed teams. They have some expertise. I know that the some of the accelerators are excited about mid-career or and later stage folks. I'm very excited about them myself, but their needs are different. The way that they learn is different, and how they get connected into the community is different as well. This week I'm actually going to Stanford's National Black Alumni Association, and I will be doing a panel on called Financial Momentum with a searcher and then someone in the private equity space. And the main reason why I'm doing the panel is that when I was at the conference 2 years ago, nobody had ever heard of search funds there, right? And this is where the search
This is
was
Stanford, right?
created,
So
right?
yeah.
Right, right. And one of the reasons why I joined on with Mark and Luke was they had me read the Stanford Primer. I'm like, wait a minute, I went to Stanford. How come I don't know about search funds? Well, I had gone to school 10 years earlier, and it was a lunch and learn that I didn't attend. So for that reason, I didn't know about it. And for many people who have had careers of any length, they may not have heard about search funds. I'm starting to see more who have heard about it, but because of some of the economic barriers that we talked about, knew they couldn't explore it straight out of school, and now they're looking to get engaged in it.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And we think a lot about, and I do a lot, and I do a lot of talking about sort of how to work with brokers and things like that. There's this element of expectation where a broker says, "Hey, I'm picturing in my mind a searcher is a very young person who may not be able to communicate with the seller, may not be able to be, able to manage this company, manage the employees, etc." And yet the sort of term searcher and what we think about when we say the word searcher is shifting, right? As more people enter the space, as this sort of lapsed MBA group gets larger, like what do you sort of, if we look forward at a couple of years, do we think that the term searcher is going to change, or do we think that there's still like a lot of like semantic work we have to do?
Well, I don't think we have to change the term. I think we have to have different sets of avatars in our mind, right? What I talked about is the avatar for searcher has traditionally been relatively advantaged, relatively young, and largely male, right? But I think as we see people be successful in search, the avatars will become more nuanced, and richer for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned Searchfunder a little bit earlier. Obviously, as a co-founder of Searchfunder, you've contributed to something that's very important to our community. Can you talk a little bit about what you, Mark, and Luke were hoping to achieve when you first set out to found Searchfunder?
And this is such a great question because when Mark and Luke came up with the idea for Searchfunder, and I met them at the point where they had a PowerPoint and a URL, and I don't even think they had like a coming soon page on the URL. It was just the URL. And they had some amazing, creative, and wonderful ideas about how to provide services to searchers. And the hard part was that there wasn't a community that existed. As I mentioned, it was fragmented. So the first thing we had to do in order to be able to service the searchers was to build the community. And that's when things really started taking off.
Ha, I mean, not to put too blunt of a point on it, but how did you do it? What were some of the steps that you took to build that community on Searchfunder?
So for the longest time, was the welcoming face of Searchfunder. And I met with anybody and everybody, and I still do today as a more of a habit, I think, than anything else, anybody who wanted to talk about buying a business. And for many years, I was the person that was the first one someone had met that did not look like they had three horns on their head when they were talking about, hey, I want to quit my job, or when I graduate, I don't want to go to Wall Street. I want to buy a smaller, medium-sized business. And I would say, great, here are the resources that are available. Here's how we can help. And I think just by being that welcoming face and letting somebody know that they weren't crazy, that they had every opportunity to look at search or in more broadly, entrepreneurship through acquisition as a pathway, that gave them a lot of comfort, and it's just been built up ever since then.
Yeah, amazing. Um, where do you think Search Funder has really succeeded in its mission? And if you could give someone using Search Funder, one tip, like how do you make the most of it? What would it be?
Yeah. When I first met Mark and Luke, just absolutely love them, and I knew that Search Funder was going to be successful no matter what. And it's so hard now because you look at all of the great services that are provided, all of the great connections that are made on Search Funder, and to realize that that started from a blank URL is just absolutely impressive. And now when I travel, there's so many great stories from people. Somebody was a searcher, now is an investor. They got their some of them funds for their investment vehicle off of Search Funder. Just like story after story. I was walking around a conference and I overheard somebody say, it was the independent sponsor conference, and one of them said, all I do is sit on Search Funder and wait for deals to pop up, right? So that's a tremendous success, for the whole team. And then, so you asked about a tip. So I have a tip because this is the most often thing I say when people ask me about something on Search Funder, and I say, go to the main menu. What I would do if you haven't done this before, even if you've been on Search Funder for a while, go to the main menu. So in the upper right hand corner, next to your profile picture is a wedge. There's the main menu. And don't just look at it, click everything on that main menu. Because oftentimes we'll get 6 months down the road, you want to remember, oh, yeah, there's that search fund map. Oh, yeah, there's that My Deals page. Like, oh, yeah, that's where I changed my profile picture and I say that I bought a company, right? I'm now a CEO, right? So that is my one tip on Searchfunder.
Fantastic. In For the audience out there, and we have maybe one of our largest audiences live for this podcast ever. So fantastic to have everybody here. Karen's going to answer some questions, so please use the chat wherever you are, whether that's Search Funder itself, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Please enter your questions, and we'll hopefully get Karen to answer a few of them here in a couple of minutes. I'm going to ask, I have a couple of additional questions on my list that I'll ask while we are gathering questions from the audience. So, my next question that I have down here is just really a broad one. Do you have any particular stories of your time, as an entrepreneur, working with searchers, et cetera, that you think our audience of largely search fund adjacent people would find interesting?
I recently wrote about this, and I think it's so important as entrepreneur, whether you go the startup side or the acquisition side of entrepreneurship. And it's what we affectionately and sometimes not so affectionately called existential Wednesdays when I was at Searchfunder. And it happens, like, you'll be just going along swimmingly and things are great, and something will happen. It could be something small, it could be something big, and suddenly you are, like, rethinking every decision you have ever made in your entire life. Like, "Why am I doing a startup? Why didn't I, go to Wall Street? Why didn't I in, like, college, change majors? Why in high school did I do this? Like, it takes you all the way back to the very, very beginning. And it's really, really hard. And if it lasts more than a day, it's really rough. And existential Wednesdays can happen on a Tuesday. And I even had it happen at a conference one time. It had been a long trip. I think I was getting sick, and I was at a mix and mingle, and I all I could think about is, like, "Why am I here?" And, the next morning, I felt fine. I was like, "I know what my purpose is. I know that I wanna support, business buyers. I want to ensure that the community is as diverse and equitable and inclusive as possible. I know that." But at that moment, at that conference, it was really, really tough.
Yeah, that really obviously that hits home, right? You and I are both part of the entrepreneur class who saw a whole group of people buying businesses and said, "I'm going to build a startup instead in the same space." So
Right,
it takes.
exactly.
I think we share a mind in this piece. It just rings so true, and I think it's fantastic advice. There's a lot of people, particularly online, who talk a lot about their successes and what's going well or interesting things that are happening, and even those people are having an existential day every once in a while. And there's a sort of silent community nodding online here too. Everyone has sort of faced that, so really appreciate you bringing that to light. We have a question in the chat from Christopher. Christopher asks, do you have any tips for current MBAs building momentum for a search post grad?
I do, and I ended up writing a whole book about it, so
She has a lot of
and
tips.
there are a lot of tips,
What's the book called?
yeah, that's part of the takeoff courses, but let me say this, I think for building momentum, I would start with thinking about who you want to be as a CEO, and then working your way backwards and looking at where you are now and how you can foster that. So, like, one of the things, like, if you're thinking about working for some time before launching a search, what I would say is, if your gap is leadership roles, get on a civic board or a nonprofit board and demonstrate your leadership skills, right? And feel free to connect with me because I've done it and I love doing it, and I can give you other tips along those lines. But I think look at who you want to be, look at who you are today, and just keep plowing away on the skills that you might need as a CEO.
So I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you've built a lot of you wrote the book, you've built a lot of resources. What is your book called, and where can they find some of the resources that you've curated?
Right. So the book is part of my Takeoff series of courses. It's very eloquently named the ETA Guidebook. It's 6 chapters. It took me over a year to write. I cover each phase of search, and I try to give the best guidance that I have heard of. And I have read every post on Searchfunder. I'm kind of behind about 6 weeks, but I'm going to be catching up. But read everything on Searchfunder, read everything that I can over the last 9 years, talked to as many people as I possibly can, interviewed as many people as I can. So I try to take their best tips and put that into something that is an actionable plan for you.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Next question for me. Obviously, I've asked this question for a couple of months, and we're almost running out of the statute of limitations, but we're
Okay.
just about at the end of Q1 in 2024. What have you sort of seen in 2024 that has sort of been a surprise, and what do you see coming down the pipe for the rest of the year?
Uh, a surprise. Oh, that's interesting. A surprise. I th I think last year I was surprised about the level of diversity at the, self-funded searcher conference. You already alluded to that, and I think that with the efforts of the Promise Venture, New Majority Capital, Mosaic Capital, the Hispanic Search Network, the Women's Search Network, the Black Search Network, all of the affinity groups as well, that we are going to be seeing a diverse crop of searchers coming up. And I think that is a pleasant surprise. And the more successful they are, the more successful the whole community can be going forward. And then what was the other bit, other part of your
Yeah.
question?
So part two, and before I ask this, last chance for everyone on the call to put in your questions. I'm out of questions after this one, so we'll let Karen get on with her day unless y'all have any more. But what do you see coming down the pipeline for the rest of 2024 and going forward?
So I talked with a number of my search barometers over the last few months at conferences and then on one-on-ones, and all of them are optimistic. Even my what I would call my least optimistic one was optimistic. So I think it's going to be a great year for business buyers and business sellers in the US. I think abroad, there's just so much opportunity. And what we are now seeing is that there is a kind of threshold level of community in various countries in Europe, certainly in Australia, and in Latin America, certain countries in Latin America as well. I think those are really prepared and poised to really take off.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I've gotten a number of questions from searchers, on my DMs, and people that have reached out to talk about the podcast in particular, asking about international search and searching in different countries. I think that's spot on. We're gonna do a couple of episodes actually, late April, early May, with that topic in mind. So really excited for that as well.
And I can't wait to listen to those. That'll be
They're
great.
gonna be fun. Um, Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to the audience as well. This is one of, I think we were close to 100 live viewers at a number of points today. Really, truly, like one of the largest audiences we've had on our little podcast here. And Karen, thank you for being such a fantastic guest. It's been great having you here.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. Happy to do it again too. So, and if anybody has any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me on any of the social media. So, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. What's your social handle? It's, I guess, best for you, LinkedIn or Searchfunder.
I probably Searchfunder, then LinkedIn, then Instagram, then Facebook. So, yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah.
And you can find me at Levine JM on Twitter, and then obviously LinkedIn and Searchfunder as well are all great places to find me. Again, thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great day.